Ladies and gentlemen, today we gather to confront an uncomfortable truth, one that each of us has experienced at some point in our lives: betrayal. We have all felt the sting of being let down, the heartbreak of someone we trusted turning away. But have you ever stopped to ask, why do they betray us? What drives people to break our trust, to hurt us in the most intimate and painful ways? The answer lies not in the surface of human interaction, but deep within the... Today, let us explore this question not through the lens of blame or victimhood, but with understanding and insight into the darker parts of the human soul. One, the shadow self, the unseen forces within. To understand why people betray us, we must first recognize the shadow, that part of each person which remains hidden from their conscious mind. We all have a shadow. It contains the aspects of our personality that we are reluctant to accept: our anger, jealousy, fear, even our desires. These are parts of us that society and ourselves may deem unacceptable, so we repress them, hoping they will disappear. But they do not disappear. When these aspects are suppressed too long, they do not vanish. They fester in the unconscious. They take on a life of their own, manifesting through our actions in ways we don't always understand. Betrayal, in this context, is often the result of someone's shadow taking over. It is an impulse that erupts out of a hidden frustration, a suppressed anger, or a desire for control, elements they themselves do not fully recognize. The betrayal is not just aimed at you, but at the aspect of themselves that they refuse to acknowledge. Thus, betrayal is a projection of inner conflict, an outward expression of an unresolved struggle within the betrayer. They hurt you not because you are deserving of harm, but because they are at war with parts of themselves they refuse to see. 2. Protection and the unconscious mind, seeing in others what we cannot see in ourselves. Another powerful force behind betrayal is the process of projection. Projection occurs when people transfer their own inner conflicts onto others. If someone is insecure, they may accuse others of being untrustworthy, even when no such betrayal has occurred. If they struggle with anger, they might misinterpret a harmless comment as an attack. They betray not out of rational thought, but because their inner turmoil distorts their perception of reality. When we project, we deny our own flaws and imperfections, instead seeing them in the people around us. These projections create a false narrative, one where the other person is blamed for what is in truth a personal struggle. The betrayal arises from their need to externalize their internal chaos, to pin their pain on you, because it is far easier than confronting their own vulnerability. In this way, the act of betrayal is not just about hurting you, it's about the betrayer's attempt to escape their own emotional prison. They hurt you not because they are truly evil, but because they are lost in a fog of their own fears and insecurities. 3. The path of individuation, a struggle with self-transformation. Finally, we must recognize that every human being is on a journey toward wholeness, a journey called individuation. Individuation is the process of integrating the different parts of the self, both the light and the dark, the known and the unknown, into a more authentic and complete version of who we truly are. This journey is not easy. It requires self-awareness, honesty, and the courage to face uncomfortable truths about ourselves. However, many resist this process. They choose instead to chase external validation, to seek power or approval from others, or to avoid the discomfort of self-reflection. In doing so, they betray not only others, but themselves. They betray the opportunity to grow, to evolve, to move towards greater consciousness. They seek shortcuts to wholeness through dominance, manipulation, or deceit, because the path of true self-understanding is too difficult to bear. People who betray others are often those who have yet to face the painful task of confronting their own inner contradictions. Their actions reflect their avoidance of self-transformation. Betrayal becomes a defense mechanism, a way to delay their own individuation by focusing on external sources of validation rather than turning inward for growth. Conclusion: the mirror of betrayal. So why do they betray you? It is not because you are weak, nor because they are inherently bad. They betray you because they are trapped in their own unconscious conflicts, their own projections, and their own resistance to change. Betrayal is a symptom, not just of their actions, but of their inner fragmentation. But in understanding this, we are not excusing betrayal. We are simply seeing it for what it truly is, a mirror reflecting the deep, often painful work that we must all do within ourselves. Betrayal reveals the gaps in our own lives, where growth has been resisted, where shadows lurk, and where projections cloud our vision. It is an invitation to look deeper, not only into the actions of others, but into the recesses of our own souls. Betrayal is a deep and painful experience, one that challenges not only our trust in others, but also our understanding of human nature. Often, when someone betrays us, it can feel as if the rug has been pulled out from under us, leaving us questioning the integrity of those around us. However, beneath this betrayal lies a more profound psychological mechanism, one rooted in the hidden aspects of the individual's personality, often referred to as the shadow. The shadow is the unconscious part of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge, consisting of all the traits, desires, and emotions that we deem undesirable or unacceptable. It is within this dark, repressed part of the psyche that the seeds of betrayal are sown. The concept of the shadow is not new, nor is it unique to any single psychological theory. It exists in every human being and represents all the aspects of ourselves that we hide from the world. These might include impulses like anger, jealousy, greed, selfishness, or even fear. These are the traits we typically don't wish to admit to ourselves, let alone to others. We repress them in an attempt to maintain our self-immunity, to preserve the version of ourselves that we want the world to see. We present ourselves as kind, compassionate, and in control, all the while hiding these darker, less socially acceptable aspects of our character. The shadow, however, doesn't disappear simply because we choose not to acknowledge it. Instead, it festers in the unconscious mind, growing in strength and influence. We may convince ourselves that we have no anger, no jealousy, or no fear, but these emotions do not vanish. Instead, they accumulate beneath the surface, out of sight but very much in control. And when the pressure of repressed emotions becomes too great, the shadow forces its way into consciousness. It may appear in the form of irrational bursts of anger, unprovoked jealousy, or even in destructive behaviors that seem to come from nowhere. The betrayal often arises from these very shadows. It occurs when an individual's repressed emotions or desires suddenly burst to the surface and take control of their actions. Betrayal is not always premeditated or conscious. Instead, it often emerges as a reaction to deep-seated, unresolved conflicts within the person themselves. It can be the result of a hidden anger or resentment that the person has been unable to express in healthy ways. Perhaps they feel overlooked or undervalued, and rather than confronting these feelings directly, they find themselves lashing out in a way that betrays the trust of those around them. This is not to excuse the betrayal, but to understand it as a manifestation of an internal struggle that has been buried for too long. The shadow is not inherently evil. In fact, it contains a wealth of potential, a raw, untapped source of energy and creativity. However, when it is ignored or repressed, it becomes a destructive force. The individual may unconsciously act in ways that cause harm to others without fully understanding why. In the case of betrayal, this might manifest as actions that hurt those closest to them, actions that feel justified in the heat of the moment, but later leave them wondering how it all went wrong. The shadow does not differentiate between right and wrong. It is simply an expression of repressed material, an attempt to regain balance when that which has been hidden becomes too powerful to ignore. For example, imagine a person who has spent years suppressing their anger in an effort to appear calm and composed. Over time, this anger builds up, finding no outlet, until one day it erupts in a burst of rage. In this moment of uncontrolled emotion, the person might betray the trust of a friend or partner, perhaps by saying something cruel or acting in a way that damages the relationship irreparably. The betrayal is not necessarily a conscious choice. Rather, it is an unconscious reaction, an outgrowth of the anger that has been buried for so long. The individual may feel deeply remorseful afterward, questioning why they behaved in such a way. But the truth is that their shadow, their repressed anger, was in control, and the betrayal was a consequence of failing to acknowledge and deal with that anger in a healthy manner. The shadow operates on a deep psychological level. It is not just a collection of negative traits. It also includes aspects of ourselves that we may have denied or disowned. For instance, someone might repress their own vulnerability, believing that showing weakness is a sign of failure. As a result, they may come across as overly strong, independent, and self-sufficient. But underneath this facade lies the fear of being vulnerable or dependent on others. This fear can manifest in destructive ways, causing them to push others away, avoid intimacy, or sabotage relationships. In a moment of insecurity or fear, they may betray a loved one not out of malice, but because their unconscious need to protect themselves from vulnerability overwhelms their conscious desire for connection. What's more, the shadow can also contain unacknowledged desires and fantasies. These desires might be socially unacceptable or outside the bounds of the person's self-emotion, so they are pushed into the unconscious mind. However, when these desires are ignored or repressed for too long, they begin to emerge in unexpected and often harmful ways. In the context of betrayal, this might involve someone acting on a desire for power, control, or revenge. Emotions that have long been buried but that find a way to surface when the person is unable to recognize and integrate them into their conscious self-awareness. For example, consider a person who has always been the people pleaser in their relationships, suppressing their own needs and desires in order to make others happy. Over time, this behavior becomes a way of life, and they may begin to resent those who rely on them. They feel taken for granted and begin to secretly harbor feelings of resentment. These emotions remain hidden for a long time, but eventually the resentment manifests in an act of betrayal. Perhaps by secretly undermining the person they feel has taken advantage of their generosity. This betrayal is not an act of conscious malice, but rather an unconscious reaction to years of repressed frustration and unacknowledged anger. The key to understanding betrayal through the lens of the shadow is to recognize that it is not simply a failure of morality or character, rather it is a failure of self-awareness. The person who betrays does so because they are not fully in touch with their own internal conflicts. They have repressed parts of themselves, parts that, when ignored, fester and grow, eventually forcing their way to the surface in the form of destructive actions. Betrayal is a symptom of an individual's inability or unwillingness to confront their own shadows. It is essential to note that this does not absolve the betrayer of responsibility for their actions. Betrayal is still a deeply hurtful and damaging act, and it often causes significant pain to those affected. However, by understanding the psychological dynamics at play, we can begin to see betrayal not just as a personal attack, but as a reflection of deeper unresolved conflicts within the betrayer. It becomes a window into the unconscious mind, offering us a glimpse of the hidden forces that drive behavior. When we understand that betrayal often stems from the shadow, we are better able to approach the situation with empathy. Even while acknowledging the harm that has been done, we can recognize that the person who betrays us may not be inherently bad or malicious, but may instead be acting out of unresolved emotional pain, fear, or insecurity. In this way, the betrayal becomes an opportunity for growth, both for the betrayer and for those who have been hurt. It is an invitation to confront the shadows that exist within us all, to acknowledge the parts of ourselves that we would rather ignore, and to begin the difficult but necessary work of integration and healing. Understanding betrayal through the lens of the shadow encourages us to look beyond the surface, to explore the deeper, unconscious motivations that drive human behavior. It asks us to recognize that we are all capable of betrayal, not because we are inherently bad, but because we are human, complex, multifaceted, and often unaware of the forces that shape our actions. When we can face our own shadows and help others face theirs, we open the door to healing, to understanding, and to the possibility of more authentic, trusting relationships. In the end, betrayal is not just a reflection of someone else's actions, but a mirror that shows us the parts of ourselves that we must confront in order to grow. Betrayal is often a deeply personal and painful experience that shakes the very foundation of trust between individuals. When someone betrays us, the natural reaction is to feel hurt, confused, and betrayed. But what if this betrayal isn't just a personal attack or an individual flaw, but rather a reflection of something deeper within the betrayer themselves? Betrayal can often stem from unconscious processes, especially the psychological mechanism of projection, where people project their own internal struggles, faults, and fears onto others. This projection, when left unchecked, can result in behaviors that lead to betrayal, not out of malice or ill will, but because the person is unable to confront their own inner conflicts. Projection is a psychological defense mechanism that occurs when a person attributes their own unacceptable thoughts, emotions, or impulses to someone else. It is a way of externalizing inner conflicts or repressed feelings that the person cannot consciously accept. For instance, an individual might feel intense jealousy or anger, but unable to acknowledge or process these feelings, they might accuse someone else of being jealous or angry. By projecting these feelings outward, the person avoids dealing with their own internal struggles. However, projection is not a conscious process. It happens automatically, often without the individual realizing it. It is a means of defending the self from uncomfortable emotions or traits that are difficult to confront. In the context of betrayal, projection operates as a way of displacing responsibility for one's own internal conflicts onto others. A person who feels insecure about themselves might project those insecurities onto a loved one, perceiving them as untrustworthy or dishonest, even when there is no evidence to support such feelings. This internal conflict is then externalized, and the betrayer may act upon these projections, behaving in ways that ultimately damage their relationship. For example, a person who feels threatened by the success or attention of their partner may project their own feelings of inadequacy onto the partner, accusing them of being self-centered or manipulative, even when this is not the case. In their mind, they have rationalized the betrayal by creating a distorted narrative where the other person is at fault, when in reality it is their own feelings of inadequacy that are fueling the behavior. Projection can also occur when a person feels guilt or shame about their own actions. If they are doing something they perceive as wrong, whether it is betraying a partner, acting out of selfishness, or lying to others, they may project these negative traits onto the person they are betraying. For instance, someone who is having an affair might accuse their partner of being unfaithful, or someone who lies might accuse others of this. By doing so, they deflect attention from their own actions and shift the blame onto others. This allows them to avoid confronting their own guilt or shame. Projection, therefore, not only distorts the reality of the situation, but also acts as a shield from the uncomfortable truth about oneself. The process of projection often involves a form of self-deception. The person who is projecting their negative traits onto someone else might not be fully aware of the extent to which they are distorting the situation. They might genuinely believe that the other person is the one at fault, not realizing that they are simply externalizing their own emotional turmoil. This makes it incredibly difficult for the person who is being betrayed to understand why the other person is behaving in such a way. They may feel as though they are being attacked or blamed for something they did not do, all the while the betrayer is simply reacting to their own internal struggles, not fully recognizing the impact of their behavior. Furthermore, projection can be a cyclical process. Once the betrayer has projected their own emotions or thoughts onto the other person, they may begin to treat that person according to the distorted narrative they have created. For example, if someone projects feelings of inadequacy onto their partner and begins to view them as untrustworthy, they may start acting in ways that undermine the trust in the relationship, such as by becoming overly suspicious, controlling, or distant. In turn, the person being betrayed may begin to feel alienated, confused, or defensive, further reinforcing the betrayer's projections. This creates a vicious cycle where the betrayer's internal struggles cause them to behave in ways that reinforce the very fears or insecurities they are projecting onto the other person. As a result, the betrayal becomes self-perpetuating, with each individual feeding into the distorted narrative. The impact of projection on relationships can be profound. Betrayal that stems from projection is not always overt or intentional. In fact, the person who betrays may not even realize the harm they are causing. They may justify their actions by pointing to the perceived flaws or wrongdoings of the other person, convincing themselves that their betrayal is warranted. This makes it difficult for the person who is being betrayed to understand the true source of the problem. They may feel as though they are being punished for something they didn't do, or they may question their own integrity. In an attempt to reconcile the situation, the emotional confusion and distress that arise from this kind of projection can be overwhelming and can take a significant toll on the relationship. It is important to recognize that projection is not simply about externalizing negative feelings. It can also involve idealizing others. In this case, the person projects their own desires, hopes, or unmet needs onto someone else, creating unrealistic expectations that the other person cannot possibly meet. For example, someone who is satisfied with their own life or self-expression might project their idealized self onto their partner, expecting them to fulfill all their dreams or desires. This can lead to betrayal when the partner inevitably fails to meet these exaggerated expectations. The person doing the projecting may then feel let down or disappointed, believing that the other person has somehow betrayed them by not living up to the idealized version they had created in their mind. Betrayal that arises from projection can also be rooted in unresolved fears or anxieties. For instance, a person who has been hurt in the past may project their fear of abandonment onto their current partner, assuming that they will eventually be let down. This fear can lead to behaviors such as clinging, jealousy, or distrust, which can in turn drive a wedge between the two individuals. The person who is betraying the relationship may justify their actions by pointing to their partner's supposed flaws or behavior, failing to see that their fears are based on their own unresolved emotional wounds. Projection in all its forms is ultimately a form of avoidance. It allows individuals to deflect attention away from their own inner conflicts and instead focus on externalizing their negative emotions or fears. By doing so, they avoid the difficult task of self-reflection and self-awareness, and in the process, they harm their relationships. The person who betrays is often unaware of the deeper emotional issues driving their behavior, and the person who is betrayed is left to navigate the confusion and hurt that arises from the projection. In relationships, it is crucial to recognize the role that projection plays in the dynamics of betrayal. Betrayal that is rooted in projection is not about the inherent flaws of either individual, but about the unconscious mechanisms at work beneath the surface. Understanding this dynamic can help both parties recognize the emotional complexities involved and open up the possibility for healing. However, for this healing to take place, both individuals must be willing to confront their own inner struggles and take responsibility for the projections they are making. Only through self-awareness and honest communication can the cycle of projection and betrayal be broken, allowing both parties to rebuild trust and understanding in the relationship. The journey of self-discovery and growth is central to understanding the complexities of human behavior, particularly when it comes to betrayal. Betrayal is often perceived as an act of deep personal injury, one that leaves emotional scars and ruptures trust between individuals. But betrayal, in its essence, can be seen not just as a reflection of one person's actions towards another, but also as a manifestation of deeper, more intricate struggles within the betrayer themselves. At the heart of this process lies the psychological concept of individuation, the ongoing, sometimes painful journey towards self-realization and wholeness. This journey is fraught with contradictions and internal conflicts. And when a person resists confronting these aspects of themselves, betrayal can occur as a means of avoiding self-transformation and self-awareness. Individuation is a process of becoming the person one truly is, a journey that involves integrating the various facets of the self, including both the light and the dark, the known and the unknown. It is the path towards understanding and accepting one's own complexities and contradictions. Yet this process is rarely smooth or linear. As we strive towards greater wholeness, we inevitably encounter parts of ourselves that are uncomfortable or difficult to accept. These might include our deepest fears, desires, unresolved conflicts, and suppressed emotions. Parts of us that we have learned to ignore or repress throughout our lives. The reluctance to confront these aspects of the self can lead to a state of inner fragmentation, where the person is not truly in touch with who they are or what they want. It is in this fragmented state that betrayal can emerge as an unconscious attempt to avoid the uncomfortable process of individuation. When a person is not fully aware of their inner contradictions or repressed emotions, they often look for external sources of validation or approval. This external focus, however, can create a sense of disconnection from the self. Rather than developing a deep sense of inner integrity, individuals may prioritize the approval of others or seek power and control as a way of compensating for their internal sense of inadequacy. This can lead to destructive behaviors, including betrayal. For example, someone who is insecure about their worth may betray a loved one in order to gain power or status, believing that these external achievements will fill the void they feel inside. Instead of addressing their own internal struggles, they choose to seek validation from others, even if it means harming the people they care about. In this case, betrayal is not an intentional act of cruelty, but rather a misguided attempt to fill an internal emptiness with external affirmation. The desire for external validation is a powerful force, and it often comes from a place of profound insecurity or self-doubt. When an individual feels disconnected from their true self or has not yet embraced the full range of their identity, they may look to others for reassurance. They may seek to control situations or relationships in order to feel secure or valued. In some cases, this need for validation can overshadow the importance of authenticity and self-awareness. Rather than looking inward and confronting their own vulnerabilities, they project these needs onto others. When their expectations are not met, or when the validation they crave is not forthcoming, they may feel rejected, misunderstood, or unimportant. This emotional pain can be unbearable, and in an attempt to alleviate it, they may engage in betrayal as a way of regaining control or power. The betrayal becomes a reaction to the perceived failure to receive the validation they seek, as though the only way to regain a sense of worth is by undermining or betraying those around them. A key aspect of individuation is the willingness to confront one's vulnerabilities, to acknowledge the parts of oneself that are not perfect, and to integrate these aspects into a cohesive whole. However, many people resist this process, either because they fear what they might find within themselves or because they feel too overwhelmed by their own internal conflicts. When individuals avoid facing these difficult truths, they often become trapped in patterns of behavior that hinder their personal growth. They may act out of fear, anxiety, or a need to maintain a certain image, rather than from a place of self-awareness or authenticity. This avoidance of self-transformation can cause them to act in ways that harm others, including betrayal. Betrayal can also arise from a desire to avoid responsibility. The process of individuation requires individuals to take ownership of their actions, to acknowledge their own mistakes, and to make amends when necessary. This can be a painful process, one that forces the individual to confront the ways in which they have hurt others or acted out of selfishness. For some, the emotional burden of responsibility is too great to bear, and rather than engage in the difficult work of self-reflection and change, they may choose to avoid it altogether. This avoidance can lead to unconscious behaviors that result in betrayal. In this case, betrayal is not simply about deceit or malice, but is a defense mechanism against the discomfort of taking responsibility for one's action. The person may betray others in an attempt to protect themselves from the emotional weight of self-awareness and the responsibility that comes with it. One of the most insidious aspects of the avoidance of individuation is the creation of false narratives. When individuals are not in touch with their true selves, they often construct idealized versions of who they are or who they wish to be. These false narratives can be highly seductive, as they offer an escape from the inner turmoil and uncertainty that comes with self-awareness. However, this constructed self-image is rarely sustainable, and the individual will eventually encounter a situation where their false narrative is threatened. This can lead to feelings of shame, guilt, or fear of being exposed for who they truly are. In an effort to protect this fragile self-image, they may betray others, not because they want to cause harm, but because they feel that their constructed identity is at risk. The betrayal becomes a way to preserve their self-image, even at the expense of the people around them. It is a desperate attempt to maintain the illusion of control and power, rather than face the vulnerability and imperfection of the true self. Betrayal in the context of individuation can also be seen as a response to existential fears. The journey of individuation often involves confronting the darker aspects of life, the realization that we are not invincible, that we are vulnerable, and that we are ultimately responsible for our own growth and transformation. For some, this realization can be terrifying. The fear of failure, rejection, or inadequacy can cause individuals to resist the process of self-exploration. Instead of moving forward into self-awareness, they retreat into familiar patterns of behavior that are designed to protect them from these fears. However, in doing so, they may inadvertently betray others, either by withdrawing from relationships, lying to avoid confrontation, or acting in ways that prevent genuine connection. The fear of facing their own limitations and imperfections can prevent them from taking the necessary steps towards self-actualization, leading to betrayal as a form of avoidance. At its core, the path of individuation requires courage, the courage to face the parts of ourselves that we have long denied or suppressed. This requires a willingness to accept our weaknesses, our failures, and our vulnerabilities. It demands that we let go of our illusions and confront the reality of who we are, both the light and the dark. However, many individuals resist this process, either because they are afraid of what they might uncover, or because they fear the emotional pain that comes with self-reflection. This resistance can lead to a range of behaviors that prevent true personal growth, including betrayal. Betrayal is often the result of an unwillingness to embrace the difficult work of self-transformation, as individuals seek external validation, control, or avoidance as substitutes for authentic self-awareness. The journey of individuation is not an easy one. It requires us to face our deepest fears, to challenge the narratives we have created about ourselves, and to engage in the difficult process of self-reflection. When we resist this journey, we create the conditions for betrayal to arise, both towards ourselves and others. Betrayal is not just a personal failing, it is a symptom of the deeper psychological struggles that occur when we avoid the work of individuation. By acknowledging these struggles and committing to the path of self-awareness, we open the door to transformation, both as individuals and in our relationships with others. Only by confronting our inner contradictions and embracing the full spectrum of our humanity can we overcome the forces that lead to betrayal and move towards a more authentic and integrated sense of self. In conclusion, betrayal is not merely a reflection of one person's deceit or malicious intent towards another. It is a deeply complex psychological phenomenon that often arises from the hidden recesses of the human psyche. It is born out of unconscious internal conflicts, repressed emotions, and unacknowledged parts of the self, the shadow, that, when ignored or denied, manifest in harmful behaviors. The act of betrayal is often a projection of one's own unresolved fears, insecurities, or desires cast onto others in an attempt to deflect from internal struggles. In many cases, betrayal stems from a lack of self-awareness and a failure to embark on the necessary journey of individuation, the process of integrating the fragmented aspects of the self into a whole. At its core, betrayal is a reflection of the betrayer's inability or unwillingness to confront their own vulnerabilities and contradictions. It is a defense mechanism, a misguided attempt to protect a fragile self-humor or seek external validation. However, this avoidance of self-awareness and self-transformation only leads to further harm, both to the individual and to those around them. When individuals fail to embark on the difficult but necessary path of self-realization, betrayal becomes a way to avoid the discomfort of personal growth, leaving a trail of hurt and confusion in its wake. Understanding betrayal in this deeper psychological context invites us to look beyond the surface of the actions and motivations of the betrayer. It challenges us to examine the unconscious forces at play within ourselves and others. to recognize the shadows that shape our behavior, and to engage in the often difficult work of confronting our inner contradictions. Through this process of self-awareness and self-integration, we can begin to heal the wounds of betrayal, rebuild trust, and move towards more authentic, compassionate relationships. Ultimately, betrayal serves as a powerful reminder of the complexity of the human experience and the need for continual self-exploration, self-acceptance, and growth in our relationships with others. Only by confronting our own shadows and embracing the journey of individuation can we break free from the destructive cycles of betrayal and cultivate more genuine, trusting connections.